It's been a while since the last one. I haven't been driving around a lot lately. Um, but I am now, so here I am. Right, so this one is a story about tumblers. The first part of it you might have heard or read on social media. It's pretty popular. I'm going to use that to start off. So there was this professor who once walked into a classroom with a glass tumbler, and he set that tumbler up on a table and asked his students, "So, is this tumbler empty or full?" The students unanimously responded, saying, "It's completely empty, of course." So the professor pulled out a couple of small rocks from his pocket and put those into the tumbler. Now those rocks, those 2-3 rocks, they basically stacked on one another and seemed to come up all the way to the brim of the tumbler. The professor now asked his students, "Is my tumbler full now?" And the students nodded, saying, "Yes, it seems to be full now that you've added those rocks into it." The professor pulled out a little bag of gravel and he poured the gravel into the tumbler. The gravel kind of made its way, into the space between the rocks, and he filled it up all the way to the brim again. And then he asked the students, "Do you think my tumbler's full now?" And the students looked at him and said, "Oh yes, now that you did that, we realized that there was some space, and yes, the tumbler's definitely full now." So the professor pulled out another small bag from his pocket, and this time he poured in some sand into the tumbler. The sand being much finer than the gravel, it occupied the remaining space between the grains of the gravel. And the professor smiled and looked at his students now, and all of the students started responding, saying, "Oh, okay, we see what you mean. This is definitely full now, because there was still some more space left, but there's definitely no space remaining now, and the tumbler is certainly full." So the professor picked up his cup of coffee that he brought along with him, and he poured the coffee into the tumbler. As you'd expect, the coffee filled the space between the grains of the gravel even, and he now had the tumbler full to the brim. Excuse me. The students were a little speechless. Excuse me. And they basically didn't want to say anything because they didn't know what other trick the professor had up his sleeve. However, the professor smiled and said, "You know what? The tumbler is really full now, so don't you worry. There's nothing more I have to add to it. But I do have something to share with you. I do have some kind of a lesson for you." And he started by asking a question. "What do you think would have happened if I had filled in the sand first into the tumbler? Would I have had space for the gravel?" And the students started responding, saying, "Probably not, because the sand would have filled the tumbler and the gravel would not have been able to go in after that." And I'm like, "Okay, what about the rocks? Had I filled in either the sand or the gravel first, would I have had space for the rocks?" And the students responded by saying, "Of course not. It would not be possible to fit the rocks in." And that's when the professor said, "This is what our life is like. This tumbler represents our life, and these rocks and the gravel and the sand represent things with varying priorities. If you do not prioritize right, if you prioritize the lesser important things before the ones of greater significance, you will end up filling your tumblers with sand or gravel. You will not have space for the rocks, which are the topmost priority items in your life. So that's what it is about. And one of the students raised his hand and asked the professor, "What about the coffee? What does the coffee represent?" And the professor said, "Well, the coffee is just to say that no matter how busy you get with life, there's always time for a cup of coffee with a friend." I really like this story. And excuse me. I think it signifies some very important aspects of life. But extending from this story, I was talking to someone this morning, and I realized that there's always this discussion, especially when it is about someone, we care about, someone from the family, someone in our close circle, about how they change over time, as to how people change over time, how they used to dedicate time to a particular thing, for the longest time, and now they don't. It's like they've changed, they've become different people. And I like to think about our life as a large tumbler full of water. And everything in our life, everything that we do, everything that we invest ourselves in is another tumbler of whatever size. Now, you only have one tumbler full of life, and you can only pour a part of it into each of those individual tumblers. These tumblers can be anything, ranging from family and friends to an activity that you pick up, a cause that you want to work for. It could be your education, it could be your work, it could be a bunch of things. But the thing is, if you're going to pour a portion of your life into something at any given point in time, you will have to take that away from something else, very likely, because you have a finite amount of energy to put into, any or all of these tumblers. So you can either put a little bit of energy into many tumblers, or a significant amount of energy in a few tumblers. The choice is completely yours, but it is a choice. It is a choice that everyone has to make, and regardless of whether you know it or not, it's a choice that you do make based on what matters to you. So knowing this, I think, is immensely helpful in alleviating the pressure that we put on ourselves, wanting to get to everything. Because once we know that there is just a certain number of things that we're going to be able to get to, and we choose with that awareness, it probably starts, all becoming more sensible and more fathomable to us in terms of how we see ourselves in various different situations. So once again, if you just imagine your life as this large tumbler which you keep pouring into a few other tumblers, and then pouring from each of those tumblers into something else, every once in a while, you just realize that there's only so many things you're going to get to. And if you prioritize right, I think you'll do just fine. Whatever you do, don't beat yourself up, saying that you didn't get to certain things, because there's only so many you can get to, each one of us. So that's that. Tell me if that story made sense, because it's really how I think I like to see my life as, and pretty much everyone else's life as. So it makes it easy to accept what I'm able to get to, and also what other people are able to get to. And it starts, like I said, making a lot more sense. Tell me if it made sense to you, and tell me if it didn't make sense to you. Either way, I'll learn something from you. And I hope you had a good time listening to this or watching this, however you're doing it. And I'll hope to see you in the next one. Thank you for your time. Have a good day, folks.